Housemaid Anna Wells became the Duchess of Chandos under quite remarkable circumstances. Her first husband, a reckless spendthrift, found himself in need of money and decided to take advantage of an old English custom, selling his wife. This took place in the mid-18th century at an inn in Newbury, where James Bridges, the second Duke of Chandos and a member of the House of Lords, happened to stop while traveling. Instantly captivated by Anna's beauty, the Duke purchased her for half a crown and promptly married her. The practice of selling wives in England began in the late 17th century. That year, short-sighted lawmakers enacted a law that made divorce only possible with parliamentary approval. This complex, exhausting, and costly process was something only aristocrats could afford. So what were the rest to do if their marriages went awry? They turned to selling their better halves. There were no legal foundations for such a bizarre method of ending a marriage, which is why legal disputes sometimes arose post-sale. However, more often than not, the situation was kept under wraps as it benefited both parties. In some cases, wives themselves insisted on the sale. What were they to do if the husband arranged by their parents turned out to be a worthless provider or a notorious philanderer? Mattie Blake, a seamstress from Wenlock, was taken to the market by her husband, who struck a deal for 2 shillings and 6 pence, boldly declaring to the buyer, "I want a different husband." Her first husband was not particularly kind to her. In Plymouth, one wife even organized an auction herself and hired a lawyer to help draft the necessary documents. Clearly, the sale was not always spontaneous. It could even be advertised in newspapers and conducted as an auction. Once, laborer John Osborne handed his wife over to a new owner for £1, while in Smithfield, a woman was valued at 50 guineas and a carriage after bidding. English historian Ashton wrote extensively about these stories in his book at the end of the 19th century. Another historian, Samuel Menifee, claimed in his work Wives for Sale that he counted several such instances as late as the 20th century. In total, there were around 400 cases across England over the span of more than 2 centuries. The transfer of ownership sometimes led to legal complications. A wife was sold, but what about her new union? Was it legitimate? Most clergymen turned a blind eye to this issue. They would officiate marriages, but just to be safe, they recorded the children born from these unions as follows: Myrna, daughter of Edmund Brigg and his wife, whom he bought for 3 shillings. Sales typically took place in markets, which makes sense, at inns, or in ports where there were plenty of people. Sometimes the crowds of onlookers grew so large that the proceedings had to be postponed. For instance, this happened in Hull. At one point, nearly 100 spectators gathered, forcing the seller and buyer to conclude their deal inside a carriage to avoid being crushed by curious onlookers. Traditionally, a rope or scarf was thrown around the woman's neck to symbolize bondage, though this was not always the case. The goal was to arrange everything to mutual satisfaction rather than to humiliate the merchandise. The geography of these sales is quite interesting. They were most common in Yorkshire, less so in London and Middlesex, and they never really took off in Scotland. One tanner attempted to auction his wife in Edinburgh and even placed an advertisement in the newspaper beforehand. What a commotion that caused! About 700 women armed with stones marched into the square to protest such shamelessness. Mackintosh, the woman at the center of the controversy, managed to save her dignity. French neighbors took great delight in mocking English customs. In the 18th century, which saw the highest number of these sales, a caricature even emerged depicting a man leading his wife to market. Across the English Channel, divorce was much simpler. Since wives rarely complained about being sold, it's likely that their new lives turned out to be better than their previous ones. Anna Wells, who ascended to the role of Duchess of Chandos, received an education, became the Duke's beloved wife, and happily lived with him for another 14 years. It wasn't until 1857 that the divorce process in England was simplified. However, the old custom continued to thrive for at least another 50 years.